Good morning to all of you who've joined us this morning. Thank you for participating. This morning's webinar, Wheel and Anchor Weekends, our very first one to Havana, Cuba, this coming November. As I mentioned, for those of you who joined a little bit early, we put everybody on mute so you can just hear me talking. It enables us to have a fluid webinar. If you do have anything you'd like to ask, any comments you'd like to make, you can scroll down to the bottom of your screen, click on the chat button, and that is the place where if you type in a note there, I will see it and I will either answer your question, address your comment right in the moment, or will do so at the end of the program. So without further ado, let's get started. This is a relatively short webinar because it's a relatively short program, so let's without further ado, let's get going. So again, let me do as I normally do with these webinars. Let give you a brief overview about what Wheel and Anchor is all about, our philosophy, which is our vision, which is and our tagline: we bring travelers together. And so, again, we're a little bit different. We're not just a tour company or a travel agency. We really are a community. And I am committed to people getting to know each other, coming together, who have a like-minded view about travel, and who want to meet other people who share the passion for traveling around the world. It's experiencing different countries and their cultures and traditions and food and all that stuff that goes along with it. And when you do it with people that you know, it's just a lot more fun. So that's the vision at Wheel and Anchor. And my personal goal for you, for each and every one of our members, is that you be well-traveled and that you be well-connected. And I know many of you are well-traveled already. I've talked to a great number of members, just came back from the East Coast. And it was great to hear stories of all the different places that people have been. Yet you can never be well-traveled enough. I've been all over the world, and for me, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. When you're well-traveled, you have a broader understanding of the world, the issues that people face, and I think you just become a more well-rounded citizen of the planet. And of course, being well-connected is just about having friends and meeting people, not just other Canadians, but people in other parts of the world. And we try to encourage that on our trips, that you talk to as many local people as possible. You'll never know what kinds of friends that you make. Again, I heard some great stories from members over the last few days on the East Coast of Canada, and they talked about people who they met on a trip and who they are still in touch with. And that, for me, is really what this is all about. Who is on our webinar today? So our team today, myself, I'm Gordon, as many of you will know, the founder of Wheel and Anchor. I'm here with Joel, who is my co-founder and does our technical support for the webinars. So if something goes wrong, we can blame him. And Cassandra, many of you have spoken to as well. She is our senior member services specialist and the person who is on the other end of the phone when you pick up to inquire about any of our trips, and so on. So let me take a brief couple of minutes to talk about what are Wheel and Anchor weekends, because we've talked about this for several months. It's taken us a little bit of time to get here. We're a pretty small team, but this is an idea that we had way back about a year ago when we first started talking about this. Our weekends are not actually a weekend. They're actually usually sort of 4 to 6 days in duration, depending on where we're going. And the idea is that we go to a destination that is within relatively easy reach of Canada. In particular, Toronto, that's where a lot of the flights come from. We're trying to develop some as well that will be more easily accessible from other cities in Canada, and where you can fly down and it's maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 hours flight. The type of place the distance that you would go to on a weekend. And we're going to go into a place with a bunch of other people who are interested in, first of all, meeting other Wheel and Anchor members. So we're here for a bit of a social, for social time, for getting to know each other. But we're also here to intensively learn about a city and a destination and a country. And not only in the intensive part of the program that we create, that we curate, but also by allowing time for you to explore a place on your own. And many of the places that we're thinking of for our weekends, we are places that often you just stop in on for a day or two. Havana is a perfect example, right? A lot of people will go to Cuba and they're like, oh, we're going to go to Havana for a day. I'm sorry, it just doesn't do it justice. You need to spend a period of time to really get the life and the feeling about what this place is all about. So again, weekends, 4 to 6 days in duration, and they are in relatively easy reach. And we go in and we do a full immersion on the place in particular. So we've got a number of other ideas that are up our sleeves. Havana is the first one. It's close, certainly close if you're in Toronto. There's direct flights down there, and other ones will follow. So our plan for today as it relates to this program about Havana, first of all, it's about you. You are travelers. You're obviously curious about Havana, about Cuba. We hear so much about it in the news. You know, we see it in every travel agency, all the different places to go in Cuba, but most of those places are not Havana. Everybody's looking to go and sit on the beach at an all-inclusive for a week. This is not about that. So it's your curiosity. It's my job as your guide and your host on this trip to give you a little bit of a taste of what you can expect from this amazing city. And Havana itself, well, why Havana? Why did we choose this as the first place to go? Well, Havana is really like no other city in the world because it is, in many ways, it's like stepping back in time. And we chose to go now because Havana is celebrating its 500th anniversary all this year. And in particular, the actual date, November the 16th, is the actual date of the 500th anniversary of Havana. So a very unique opportunity to visit a city that is celebrating such an auspicious occasion. Of course, Havana, Cuba dates back to the 1500s. And yet, despite all of that, it's very different than other Spanish enclaves in Central and Latin America. And it's gaining in popularity, maybe not from our political friends down south of the border, but I think that's a good thing. Charles and Camilla visited Cuba earlier this year. They were the first royals ever. And I want to say one other thing about Havana, which a big influence for me is other travelers. A good friend of mine who is an amateur photographer. I think he's more like a professional, but he's been and he's going to Havana now, I think, for the 8th time. He absolutely adores the city. And for him, it's like no other place. As a photographer, to see through the lens of what the people and the cars and the architecture in that city, it's truly, truly an amazing place. Let's talk about Havana itself for a moment. Of course, Cuba, as we all know, is literally only about 160 kilometers from Florida. It's, when you think about all of the political tensions that have existed over the years, it's right next door. It's like from here to Muskoka. If you're from Toronto to Muskoka, or not even from Calgary to Edmonton. I mean, that's how close Havana is to the actual North American continent. The country itself, we often think Caribbean islands, small. Cuba's basically about the same size as Portugal. So it's quite a huge island. It has 11 million inhabitants in Havana, the capital 2.1 million. So if you think about that, that's basically like the size of Toronto. So it's a very large city, and we are really only going to get a taste of it in the 5 days. I think we're going to get some of the best taste of it, but it's quite there's much more to Cuba and to Havana than one might think. So let's go through the program now, day by day. First of all, we're going to leave on November the 13th. We're going to fly out of Canada based on Air Canada's most recent schedule. If you choose to fly in Air Canada, they fly out in the evening. So that was changed recently. It does change from time to time. So they leave around 8 in the evening out of Toronto, so you can connect in from other cities in Canada, and arrives later in the evening. When we arrive, we're going to head straight to our hotel. I've looked at a whole bunch of different ones, and yet I ended up here at the Rock Presidente, which is a lovely 4-star property not far from the seashore in Havana. It's within walking distance to some very interesting parts of town. You could even walk. It's a bit of a walk, about a 30-minute walk down to Plaza de la Revolucion itself. You can see from the decor, it's got some historical influence to it. It's got a wonderful outdoor pool. The rooms are very cozy. It's just a nice place to stay. A great spot for our 5 nights here in Havana. When we arrive, again, based on the current schedule, it looks like we'll arrive a little bit too late to head up to the Fortaleza. But the plan is, if it's not the evening we arrive, and it depends on the timing that you come in, we will definitely head up there every night at 9 o'clock. They fire off these cannons. It's quite it's quite an incredible thing to witness, and I'm sure that you will enjoy it. If we don't do it the very first night, I think it's kind of a neat little rite of passage when we arrive in, if we are there in time to go and witness it. If not, we'll do it one of the other evenings. And this sits right opposite from the old town at this Fortaleza, which we will visit during our stay there. Our first full day of the tour, and I've tried to theme these days a little bit. I totally forgot to mention our guide. We have somebody very special, and again, this is what makes the trip particularly special. A gentleman by the name of Enrique Nunez, who will be our guide for our whole time when we're down in Havana. And he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. He epitomizes the character, the humor, the charisma of the Cuban people. He was a former actor, so he has quite a sense of humor, and it seems like he knows everybody in town. So he's going to be the guy that takes us around in Havana. And for the first full day, we're gonna head out to a place called Fusterlandia. And Fusterlandia is really a very poor part of town. As you may know, Havana, Cuba as a whole, is quite poor by our standards. People on average still earn about $20 a day US. $20 a month, $20 a month, if you can imagine that. But Fusterlandia was a part of town that was particularly impoverished. And this artist, Jose Fuster, came along and he wanted to reinvigorate his neighborhood. And he created all of these incredible art forms. And we tried to find a picture of it. There are pictures online, but of course they're copyrighted, so we can't use them. And he created this incredible village of sculptures and statues. It's like a children's theme park almost. Incredible. We'll spend a bit of time there before then going down to Plaza Revolucion itself, which of course was the large square named after the 1959 Cuban Revolution. This is the place that Castro would come out and address the people. So it's a large square. It's something like 77 hectares in size. It's a very imposing place in the center of Havana. Not far away, we are going to stop as well at John Lennon Park. And, it's a funny story because the Beatles were banned at the time, back in the 1960s, when the tensions between the US and Cuba, because of their, conversion, their alliance with the Soviet Union, they were so high and the Beatles were completely banned. But all of a sudden, many years later, I think it was in the 80s, Fidel had a change of heart and he embraced John Lennon. He created this whole park and this statue of John Lennon. And there's this old man that actually takes the glasses of John Lennon, those wire-rimmed glasses, and he puts them on and takes them off because they used to leave them on, but the tourists would steal them. So it's a little anecdote about the John Lennon Park. So we'll spend a good 3 or 4 hours together with Enrique, seeing some of these iconic parts of the city, but we'll have lots of time on our own. We'll have basically the rest of the afternoon to explore Havana. And I say this about so many places, this is a city to wander around. You just can't get enough of admiring the people and the buildings and everything else that's going on. The next day, I call it Hemingway Day. So on the 15th of November, we are going to explore a little bit into the life of Ernest Hemingway. So you may not be aware that he actually spent 20 years there. And we're going to visit his home called Finca Vigia, which is in a suburb of Havana. He and his wife lived here for 20 years. They parked their boat nearby at the seaside. He was inspired to create some of his greatest works. And so one of the things we'll do as well is we'll go down to the little fishing village of Coimar, which inspired his novel, The Old Man and the Sea. That was written in Cuba, and Havana is a very important part of Hemingway's whole career and what influenced all of his works. Later on that day, we're going to head out to Cristo de la Habana. This is the giant statue of Jesus. It's like every Spanish city has one. Every colonized city has a giant statue like this. I know seeing it in, of course, Rio de Janeiro and Quito in Ecuador and in Panama City, and they all have these. So this is an incredible marble statue overlooking Havana Bay. And from here, we'll have a chance to wander then into the into the old town and again explore on our own. We'll have a bit of free time today, but this is then the day that we'll take part in the 500th anniversary celebrations. We're going to have a dinner, and we're going to be out in the melee of people celebrating the incredible history of this city. So that will be one of the many highlights of our time in Havana. The next full day, once again, we're going to head out of town. So this will be our one day where we get a chance to head just a little bit into the countryside, outside, heading to Vista Hermosa. And Vista Hermosa is an eco farm that was really one of the first ones to sort of pioneer this whole notion of slow food. The products that they produce are all or largely organic products, and they have quite a traditional approach to the production of food. We'll get to, for those that wish, we'll go on a little horseback ride there. We'll take a little sail in the lagoon, and we'll have a really an amazing farm to table experience. The meals that we've got put together on this program, by the way, Cuba isn't known for great food. And you may have talked to somebody, may have been yourself before, gone to one of these all-inclusive resorts in Varadero or in one of the other Holguin or one of the other parts of Cuba. And they generally have not done well with food, but Havana has come a long way. And we particularly have gone to lengths together with Enrique to pick out places like this where we really get to experience the good side of Cuban food. And this will be one of the days that we'll do that. In the evening, we're going to have a concert of Cuban jazz. And of course, Cuban music, we can all think back to the influences in the 60s and 70s that we heard in Miami and so on. So we'll spend a night really enjoying the performance together with a dinner where we'll get to immerse ourselves in this incredible music that is also known as Afro-Cuban jazz, with its own sort of distinct flavor. The next day is, I'm calling it rum and cigar day, because let's face it, these are two of the things that we associate most with Cuba. Is of course cigars, that goes without saying, and rum. So in the morning, before we head into the old town, we're going to take a visit to a cigar museum, a cigar factory. We're actually going to see, I don't know whether it's going to be Cohiba or one of the many other ones. I prefer the smaller ones, frankly, because then you really get that feeling of sort of a smoke-filled room, and these men and women that sit around and hand rolling these incredible Cuban cigars, which of course, as we know, are the finest in the world. So we'll start the morning with some cigars. We'll head on into Old Havana itself. The entire inner city is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and I think that becomes obvious as soon as the moment that you walk around. There's so many plazas and squares, colorful buildings. We'll go to Plaza Vieja, Old Square. They have a 16th century fortress, the Castillo de Real Fuerza. And it goes on and on and on. And the other thing that I have to say about Havana is it's the old buildings. Some of them are in fine shape, like the ones you see in the picture here. Other ones are literally crumbling. People still living inside. It's their home. You see automobiles from the 1950s because, of course, post the U.S. embargo of Cuba, they weren't allowed to import anything. So all these cars have been restored, and they used everything but the kitchen sink to pull them back together and keep them running. It's one of the amazing things about Cuba. But you'll also see horses and carriages going through the streets. So being here, you don't know whether you're stepping back 60 years or 160 years. That is really what Cuba is all about. So after taking enough time to wander around Old Havana, we'll probably go back again. You may have gone on one of the free afternoons. There's just so much to this part of the city. We'll also visit a rum museum, because not just cigars, but of course rum are sort of, it's not quite as ubiquitous as cigars, but rum is a very popular and very high quality product that comes from Cuba. So we'll have a little bit of a taste of rum, and then later on that evening, we'll get to see a performance of the Buena Vista Social Club, which I think most of you will probably have heard of that name before. This was a very, very famous ensemble. At the time, the cumulative age of the musicians in the band was something like 300 years old. That was the origin of Buena Vista Social Club. We'll get to see it live. And once again, it'll be a very, very, very memorable experience on our trip. And no sooner than we got here, and our 5 nights and our 6 days will come to a close, and we will have already seen a ton of what Havana has to offer. But as my friend who frequently travels to Havana said to me, he said, you just can't get enough. So you may want to stay on a little bit longer. We have a provision for that to stay on in Havana, or you may want to continue on to other parts of Cuba and perhaps go down and enjoy one of the spectacular beaches. They do really have spectacular beaches. So let me now go through the program, a few of the details, the logistics of the program, and what it's all about. So first of all, it's going to take place from November 13th to the 18th. And again, we picked those dates because the 500th anniversary celebration falls sort of smack dab in the middle of that. The price for the land portion of the program and everything that I've described is $23.50 Canadian per person based on double. The nice thing is that there isn't a big premium for singles. So for just a couple $100 more, you can have your own room, and you can stay on for a fairly modest price in that hotel, which includes a wonderful breakfast buffet. What's all included in that? Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff. So this is that's based on the 5 nights in the hotel accommodation. I put 5 or 6 nights because I think some may want to just stay on an extra night. I would certainly encourage it. All our sightseeing is by Enrique and some of his compadres. Of course, will be in English. We'll have breakfast buffet. We'll have either lunch or dinner, and some days lunch and dinner each day at some fantastic restaurants. I forgot to mention Casa Grande that we'll see, a terrific seafood restaurant that we'll visit when we're on our Hemingway day, and some other great places to eat. We'll have tickets to the 500th anniversary celebration for Havana. Of course, our airport transfers and all our other ground transportation, and I will be hosting this myself. I look forward to guide you as well around this wonderful city. In terms of what's excluded, of course, as usual, it's just basically the insurance and any beverages. Luckily, beverages are quite reasonably priced in Cuba, and then the airfare. So let me explain a little bit about airfare. Most of you will know that we've recently moved towards keeping the airfare separate from the program, largely because our members are coming from a wider geography across Canada. And we didn't want to just say, oh, Toronto, because I know a lot of people would rather not fly via Toronto. So this gives you an indication of what the airfares are like. They're a little bit more than they otherwise might be because of these anniversary celebrations, but still very much worth the trip. So when we last checked the fares, this is on the most direct routes, by the way, out of Toronto, Toronto, Montreal, for around $1,200-$1,400, and actually not that much more to fly from other cities in Canada. That's assuming flights on Air Canada, so which obviously channel through Toronto, and then the nonstop hop about 3 hours down to Havana. There are other ways to get there, and there are less expensive flights that you can take. A lot of them will go via the U.S. They'll take a little bit longer, but if you have the benefit of time, you may want to consider taking a different route, and we can certainly give you some guidance on that, and book whatever flight itinerary would suit you best. So yeah, now we come to the question and answer session. If you do have any questions, of course, this webinar is being recorded. We have a lot of people that like to watch it after the fact, either those who have participated or those who were not able to join us this morning. So if you do have questions, just shoot it to that email address, but a couple have come in, so I'd like to address those questions now. First of all, John was asking, what currency do they use in Cuba? Well, Cuba is interesting, and for some of you may have traveled back in like East Germany back prior to the fall of the wall. They have 2 currencies in Cuba. They have the local peso. It's the Cuban peso, but they have a local peso, which is called CUP, and and a foreign currency, CUC, which they trade at 1 to 1. So the prices in Cuba are very, very cheap for locals, but for foreigners, we're not allowed to use the other currency. We have to buy CUCs. It's basically equivalent to the US dollar, and we can get those when we arrive in Cuba. Okay, then I have a question here from Fran, asked, what is the weather going to be like in November? So the weather in November, I mean, Cuba is in the Caribbean. And so it's pretty much always warm. In fact, when I was reading up some of the facts and figures, I think it snowed once in Cuba sometime in the late 19th century. But the temperature should be in the high 20s. So somewhere between sort of 28 and 30, 31 at the most. It's pleasant, it's warm. It's because it's on the sea, it's got some nice breezes. So it cools down a bit at night. Of course, the rooms are air conditioned, so that's not a problem. But I wouldn't expect that it would get much cooler than sort of the mid-20s in the evening. Very, very pleasant climate in Cuba. Heather asked, are Americans allowed to go to Cuba right now? Good question, Heather. As you know, there's been a lot of back and forth, a lot of political hoo-ha, for lack of a better word. At the moment, they have reimposed restrictions on American travelers to Cuba. So under the previous administration, Americans were allowed to go in on an individual basis, but now they've pared that back. So it is much more difficult for Americans to visit. So we won't see a lot of Americans. We're more likely to see Canadians, Europeans, but we won't see Americans. So if you do have an American passport, let us know, and we'll see if what we can do to accommodate that. I know Americans do come up to Canada to fly in, but then you don't want to get a stamp in the passport, and there's all these different rules. So we'll try to help you out. For Canadians, not a problem. And Mark asked, how safe is it in Havana? It's very safe. Cuba is a very impoverished, I shouldn't say impoverished. It's a poor country if you compare Cuba to North America or Europe on a dollar for dollar basis. But they have, in some ways, they don't have all the material possessions that we have, that's for sure. As I mentioned, $20 a month is still the average salary for Cubans. But they have they have one of the best healthcare systems in the world. There's more doctors in Cuba than all of Africa, as an example. So to get back to the question of safety, you're pretty safe. You can pretty much walk anywhere in Havana without risk of anything happening. The penalties for anyone that would try to commit crimes, particularly against tourists, are very, very strict. So I've never heard of anyone having a problem there. I mean, you'd want to be wary like you would anywhere about pickpockets and so on, but God knows we don't hear about terrible terrorist acts or anything that happen in other parts of the world on a, unfortunately, more and more frequent basis. So it's quite a safe city. Good. I think that's all the questions that we have for today. So yeah, we're going to wrap up in pretty good time this morning. If you do have any questions at all, please drop me a note, drop Cassandra a note, ask us what you will about the program. I'm very pleased to announce that our brochure is just about finished. I just noticed there was a couple of things we have to make some tweaks to. It will be mailed out. It'll be in your inboxes within the next 24 hours. Our pamphlet that will give all the detailed information on this program. And yeah, we hope you'll join us. We're going to have a lot of fun. It's going to be a small group. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. Somewhere between 10 and 16 people is all we're going to take, depending on who decides to come along. So please do come and join us. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for tuning in on our webinar this morning. It's always a pleasure to see so many members come out with so much interest about our trips. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Those of you in Southern Ontario, our events are going to be released before this weekend. So look out in our weekly email newsletter. You'll find out about our events in Southern Ontario. And I promise for those of you out in the West, I will be back out there again soon as well. So in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.